Hi guys, Mr. Brown here. We're going to do a lab today on the alkaline earth metals. The alkaline earth metals are a pretty reactive group. They're group 2, so let's look at the periodic table here. Group 2 is the second column right here. This has beryllium, magnesium, calcium, strontium, barium, and radium. We are going to focus on this part right here in the middle. All right. Now, if we count over one group, two group, these guys all have one valence electron. Those are the alkali metals because they only have one valence electron, and that one valence electron is so far away from the nucleus, it loses electrons really easy. These guys have two valence electrons. They're slightly closer. The more protons pull those two electrons in closer to the nucleus, they're slightly closer, but these guys also lose their electrons really easy. These are the two most reactive metals on the periodic table because they lose their electrons the easiest. That's what we call metallic characters, when they lose their electrons easily. All right? And since the electrons get farther away from the bottom as we go down, they get more reactive because they lose their electrons easier. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the reactions here that these guys do, and some of their characteristics, some physical properties, some chemical properties, and we're going to compare them. All right, so we're going to do this. First part, we're going to compare magnesium and calcium. I'm going to put 5 milliliters of water. I'm going to get a graduated cylinder here. I'm going to put in 5 milliliters of water in the first test tube. And I'm going to put 5 milliliters of water in the second test tube to test the magnesium, so I'm doing everything the same here between the two. I'm going to pour that in there. Now, what the second tube is for is I'm going to put this thing over the top of this, and I'm going to try to catch whatever gas comes out of here. I'm going to do that with both of them. All right? I'm going to do these one at a time. I kind of have to do this quick so I can be ready here. I need to light my Bunsen burner. Be ready to go. So I'm going to take this calcium turning, and I'm going to put this into this first test tube. I need to be ready because it's a pretty fast reaction. So I put it in there. Immediately it starts to fizz, so I'm putting this thing over the top, and I'm trying to catch all the gas that's coming out of that. You can see it's bubbling up. There are lots and lots and lots of bubbles coming out of that thing. I'm going to wait till it kind of slows down a little bit. All right, I got my wood splint burning here. Let's see what happens. All right, I got an explosion that happened there. So the gas exploded. That tells me that that's hydrogen. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the magnesium. And magnesium ribbons are little thin pieces, it looks like metal strips. And I'm going to put that in there. And wow, it doesn't really look like anything is happening in comparison. All right? So one of the things to do sometimes to help speed up a reaction is you heat it. And so I'm going to heat this in a Bunsen burner. So let's turn this thing around, make sure I get it in the video this time. And I'm going to boil this. And hopefully that's going to get the magnesium heating. Now when you boil it, you never turn the test tube straight up like this. You always kind of tilt it to the side and away from anybody. So in case it splatters, it doesn't hit anybody in the face or hit them at all. And so I can feel it starting to boil. You see bubbles coming up there. It doesn't take very long for that little amount of water to boil. And so, wow, that's really boiling fast. I'm going to kind of keep it boiling. I'm going to aim this back over here. I'm going to put that in there. I'm going to grab this one and put it over the top. And I'm going to hold that and try to catch any gas that comes from that one. All right? It doesn't look like I'm getting much of anything going on there. All right, so I'm going to light my wood splint. I'm going to put it in the test tube. And then nothing happens, really. Write that down, that nothing happens with that one. All right. Now, another way to tell, besides just listening for that popping sound that goes on, another way to tell something is you can use an indicator. Phenolphthalein is an indicator of acid base. And so if I put a drop in here, it's going to change color. And I put in one drop, and you can immediately see lots of pink color. I'm going to add one drop to the magnesium, and maybe it doesn't even look like anything happened at all here. So I'm going to let that go for a little while, but I'm going to put a piece of paper behind, and I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but that test tube, turns just slightly pink. It's kind of hard to see. Maybe you can see it at that angle a little better. But anyway, it turns slightly pink, while that one is really strongly pink. I'm going to shut off my Bunsen burner because I don't need that anymore. And what I have here is, you guys, I have pH paper. Okay, let me set this down and arrange this thing. I have some pH paper, all right? And pH paper is colored piece. I have 3 strips of them there. It's a colored piece of paper, and when I put chemicals on it, I can tell the pH. Maybe you've had this kind of stuff, you've seen this in your pool or something like this, but what we're going to do is we're going to add 1 drop of magnesium hydroxide, MgOH2, the label's kind of coming off that one, calcium hydroxide, 1 drop, and barium hydroxide, and we're going to compare the color to this right away. So here's the magnesium hydroxide. I put a drop on it, and immediately it's kind of a yellowish green color, probably about an 8. All right, so we're going to write that down so we remember that. That one's about 8 for the pH. Let's add calcium hydroxide. So we add a drop of calcium hydroxide to it. Whoa, and that one's much darker. That one's more like, oh, probably about a 12. All right, so we're going to put 12 down for that one. And then last of all, we're going to put the barium hydroxide on here. Put a drop of barium hydroxide on. And that one's even darker. All right, but that only goes up to a 12, but that's probably a little bit darker 12. So we're going to call that 13. All right, so we're going to write those things down. The magnesium hydroxide's an 8. Calcium hydroxide's about a 12. And the barium hydroxide's about a 13. All right, so we're back here. Part C. What we're going to do is we're going to use the laboratory balance here, and we're going to measure out 1 gram samples of magnesium sulfate. That would be that stuff. 1 gram sample of calcium sulfate, and 1 gram sample of barium sulfate. So what I have here is I have these little dishes, these little plastic dishes on here, and I put that on, that changes the mass. The cool thing I can do is I can push that red button, it's called the tare button, and what it does is it goes to 0. And so now whatever I add on there is going to be the exact mass of the powder that I want. So I'm going to put a little bit on here, and I'm going to need way more than that. And there we go. There's 1 gram. Okay, there's 1 gram of the magnesium sulfate. And now I'm going to weigh out 1 gram of the calcium sulfate. Almost there. All right, there's 1 gram of the calcium sulfate. Tare to 0. And I need 1 gram of barium sulfate. Whoop. Just a bit more. All right, so there's 1 gram of the barium sulfate. I'm done. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put those powders in each one of these test tubes here. So let's tilt that up a little bit so we can see that a little bit better. Step out of the way. All right. So I bend this just a little bit. I don't know if you guys can see that very well, but if you kind of bend those little plastic things, you can pour it all and get all the powder right in there. All right. So there's my magnesium sulfate. And I bend this one a little bit. All right. That was kind of hard, but there is the calcium sulfate. And the last one is the barium sulfate. There we go. All right. So in each one of these test tubes now, I'm going to add, it says they add 5 milliliters of distilled water. So there's my graduated cylinder again. And we're going to add 5 milliliters of water. All right, let's pour that in. Okay, that's about 5 milliliters of water. And that's about 5 milliliters of water. All right, so now what I need to do is I'm going to take a glass stirring rod and I'm going to stir each one of these a bit. So I'm going to stir them about the same amount. And so I don't get any contamination, I'm going to rinse them off. Rinse off this stirring rod every single time. What would also work is if I used a different stirring rod. So now let's stir this one up. This one is the calcium sulfate. And the last one I'm going to stir up is the barium sulfate. And then I'm going to let them sit and settle. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to do this part with a spot plate here. All right, this plastic dish is called a spot plate. And the reason why it's called a spot plate, it's actually got 3 by 5. It's got 15 little dishes in it itself. So what I'm going to do with this, it tells me that I'm going to add 10 drops of each of these solutions to it. So I need 10 drops of magnesium chloride, and I'm going to put that in this one. So there's my magnesium chloride, MgCl2. I need 10 drops of calcium chloride. So 10 drops of calcium chloride. And then I need 10 drops of barium chloride. Now, what I'm going to add to each one of these is, if I read the directions, it says 3 drops of sodium carbonate. So what happens when I put sodium carbonate on here? So I hope you guys can see this, but 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. All right. So in each one of those, I got a white powder. Now, as I got it, this one is the lightest. It barely turned at all. This one is much darker, and that one has got the most white color to it of all. Okay. Now let's go back and let's look at our solutions. All right, and so we're going back. We're going to look at our final solutions here. If I look at these, this is the one I put the magnesium sulfate in. Almost all of it dissolved. If I look at the next one, magnesium sulfate, the magnesium sulfate, it's in the middle. And the barium sulfate, it was the least soluble. All right, so make sure you're writing things down and then answer those questions on the back side. If you listened to me earlier on, you probably know what the answers are. If you need to go back and look at your notes, or if you need to look at the front page of the lab and read some of that, that should be helpful too.